Welcome to the Kansas NG9-1-1 GIS training series. In this episode, we'll review the attributes and attribute domains in the template geodatabases and populate some of those attributes. Before we begin, though, we should have a discussion of attribute domains and just what they are. An attribute domain is a list of valid values for a specific field type within a geodatabase. It's a method of enforcing data integrity. The attribute domain, once it's set up within the geodatabase and assigned to a particular field in a feature class, will allow you to limit the values that are entered for that field to the list of items in the domain. This is very important to Next-Gen 911 because many of the call routing components will only be able to understand records that conform to the expected domains. If a field in an address point record, for example, has a value that is not in the expected domain, a 911 call from that location may not route properly. So let's take a look at the domains that are inside the template geodatabases. So here's my template geodatabase. And remember, I said that the domain is a property of the geodatabase, not necessarily of the feature class. And what I mean by that is you have to go into the properties of the geodatabase to find the domains. And here they are. There are quite a few of them, most of them assigned by NENA, the National Emergency Number Association, who's handling the national standards. A few of them have been assigned by the GIS subcommittee. They are Kansas standards only, but the vast majority of them are from NENA. And when you look at the domain, you see a few things. Let's take a look at the address numbers. First of all, you have the domain's name and the description, of course. But when you come down to properties, you begin to see some things about the domain itself. All the values are long integers. The domain type is range. There are actually two different types of domains. There's range and coded value. This one's a range. I'll show you coded value in a moment. And what it says, essentially, is that any value assigned to a field that has this domain tied to it must be between 0 and 999,999. These split and merge policies are very interesting functionality, but they're outside of the scope of what we're discussing here today. Now let's take a look at address parity, which is a coded value. So when I click on address parity, I see that it is a coded value, that it is a text field. And in coded value, I have entries down below. What coded value means is that for every valid value there is a code and a description. Now the code is what is actually stored in the geodatabase. The description is what is displayed on the screen when you are working with the data inside ArcMap. If you are storing your data for the Next-Gen 911 project in a format that is not a geodatabase, whether it's a shapefile or you're working with other software, remember that it is the code that is the value you are required to have. Whatever is in the code field in these templates is the value that you're required to have. This description is only a text description that makes them a little more understandable to the human eye. Now, some of these descriptions can get a little bit wordy. We chose to err on the side of describing too much instead of too little. If you find that the long description displaying in ARC is causing you some issue or you don't like it, you're welcome to go into the domain in the geodatabase properties and edit the description. Now the code cannot be changed, but the description can be set however you're most comfortable with it. So now let's take a look at how these domains actually get applied to fields inside a feature class. So we're going to open up the properties of the road centerline feature class, and here at the top we have the steward. Now the data steward is a field that has a domain within the data model. So I can come down here to the properties and I see that one of those properties is domain. If I click in here, I will get a drop down with a list of all of the domains that match the field type or data type of the field I'm working with. Steward is a text field, so I'm only seeing those domains that are actual text fields. And down here at the bottom, let me move this up and make sure you guys can see this. There. And down here at the bottom, we have the stewards. I've assigned the domain, I hit apply, and I am finished. It is that quick. Now, if you have data in the field already and you assign stewards as the domain, it's possible you're going to get an error message if you have something that doesn't fit the domain requirements. So this is a good thing to set up on a feature class before you load data into it, and then get working. Inside the template geodatabases, all of the domains have already been assigned to the fields inside the feature classes. You don't have to worry about doing that. However, if you are storing the data in your own geodatabase, a different geodatabase, you'll need to create the domains and assign them. Also, remember that when you load data into a feature class with domains assigned to some of the fields, and your data has values that are invalid within the domain, Arc will still load the data and hold those invalid values, but you need to go back in and edit them so that they match up appropriately with the domain. So now let's take a look at the attribute fields. And here in the road centerline feature class, there are quite a few attributes. I'm not going to go over each of them in detail. We have detailed them in the Kansas NG9-1-1 GIS data model document. You're welcome to go through them and look at the descriptions and the domain descriptions in there. However, I am going to hit the 4 fields that are in every single feature class and explain them to you briefly. The first 2 come as a pair. They are the last update field, which you can see right here, LUpdate, and the update by field, which is closer to the end of the document. Together, these 2 provide a history of who changed the feature last and when they changed it. Now, as a local data steward, when I considered this requirement, I knew that it was not going to be the easiest thing in the world to remember. It is one more step to add to an editing process, and I decided to look for a way to automate it as much as I could, and that is where editor tracking comes in. There is a tab back here called editor tracking, and if you click on it, for every feature class inside the template geodatabases, editor tracking has been enabled. And what it does, you can see down here at the bottom, is automatically assign the update by and the last update field. The update by will be populated with whoever is signed into the computer when the edit is made, and the last update field will be automatically filled with the time. Now the time is in UTC. It is not in your local time, but it can be converted if necessary. And right now we're just looking for a way to document that you don't have to pay a whole lot of attention to on your end. Now, if you're using an older version of ArcGIS software, something previous to 10.1, or you're using a different kind of software entirely, or you're choosing to use shapefiles, this automatic editor tracking feature will not work for you. You're welcome to come up with your own method. I highly encourage you to automate it if you possibly can. This will mean that it's always up to date, it's always accurate, and you don't have one more thing to remember. Now the next field that is in every feature class that I'm going to discuss is the data steward. Let me go back over. And we've seen it and we've talked about it really briefly before, but the data steward field is going to be the same in every record in your data. The steward field is an identifier for who is responsible for the record, and if it's in your data, that would be you or your agency. So let's take a look at populating that data steward field in the road centerline feature class. Cancel out of this and add the road center lines to my map. There they are. And if I go into the attribute table, you'll see that the steward is not filled out anywhere in the data. So I need to be in an edit session. So if I select a few roads, I'll just grab a few here, and go to my attribute window, you'll see that the steward is indeed null. But when I click on it, instead of being able to type and edit in that fashion, I actually have a drop-down list of everything that is valid. And notice that I am seeing the description, not the code. So in this case, I'm going to pick Dickinson County. And now the data steward is assigned. If you're not aware of this, you can actually click up here on the name and do the same thing. And it'll assign to everything that has been selected. This is a very easy way to assign all of the values at the same time. If you select all, it'll give you a warning, but unless you have an enormous amount of data, it won't take more than a few seconds. and perform the same function. Click on the top. It'll evaluate everything to see what fields are identical and which ones are different. And I can go to the data steward. I can also type Dickinson and it'll come up. And it is rolling through and assigning. And now we have the data steward in every field. Now, sometimes, I'm actually going to take that out right quick. Now, sometimes people prefer to go into the attribute table rather than in the attribute window to do their update. So let's take a look at doing that. If we go into the attribute table, we are here. We have all of our fields, all of our records selected. We can right-click on the steward, and we can go to Field Calculator. Now, at this point, you have two options. You can either type out the text description exactly, and you have to be exact, or you can type out the code. In this case, Dickinson County's code is 484990. And if I say OK, it thinks about it for a minute and begins calculating through. And even though I used the code, it actually populated the steward to my eyes with the description. Now you could use this same technique to populate a lot of the fields, state, left, and right, for example. If you do something like create a selection of all of your street center lines that are within a city limit boundary, you can populate the municipality left and right. Just remember to go around the outside and make sure that all the lefts and rights are really true, because along the edge of the city a lot of the time it's going to be unincorporated on one side of the road and then the city name on the other. Now I want to show you a trick that'll make things a little bit easier when you are creating new records, and that is assigning default values. So if you close this and go back into the properties of the road centerline feature class. Actually, I'm going to stop editing before I do that. When you go to the data steward field that we were just discussing, you have the opportunity to put a default value. So 484990 and hit apply. If the number or value that you put in that default value is valid in the domain, the system will just take it, and now any feature that I create going forward within the road centerline feature class will automatically have that populated. Since so many of these fields are going to be, if not always the same, close to always the same, this default value can really save you a lot of time going forward as you're creating new records. Now the fourth field I'm going to talk about is the unique identifier field. There is one of these in every single feature class in the template geodatabase and in the data model itself. A unique identifier field isn't the easiest thing in the world to fill out in ARC. A lot of people consider the object ID, let me open this up, the object ID field here to be unique, and it is in the moment, but this segment here could be 200 Avenue today, and the exact same segment number tomorrow might be 5th Street, because ARC reassigns those object IDs on a relatively regular basis depending on the processes you apply to your data. So we need something that is going to stay. We need something when we say segment 1 is 5th Street, it's 5th Street tomorrow, it's 5th Street a month from now. Until somebody legally changes the name, it stays 5th Street. So that is the seg ID or segment ID field. As I said, this isn't the easiest thing in the world to populate because all of the tools that are natively available in ARC to do this actually overwrite the values that are already there. So every time you try to assign a value to a new record, you end up overwriting the previous records as well. We didn't want to do that, so we have a tool that we have built for you to use. Now, in the same place that you downloaded the template geodatabase, either the Kansas 911 Coordinating Council website or the DASC website, you will also find a download for NG9-1-1 tools. And inside that you have some folders and you have this toolbox right here, the NG9-1-1 toolbox. Right now it only has 2 tools in it, but we are hoping to get more added in the future. And the one that we are going to look at right now is the Assign Unique Identifier field. So if I double click on this tool, it comes up and it asks me what feature class I'm talking about. Well, I'm talking about road center lines. And then it says which field is the unique ID field that you're wanting to populate. So I go to the drop down and I pick Seg ID. And I hit OK. And this actually runs very quickly. You can see it ran in just a couple of seconds. And what it has done is assigned a unique identifier that is based on the current object ID and the time. It really doesn't matter what it's based on as long as the identifier is unique and not going to change as time goes on. So if I open the data back up again, you will see that here is the unique identifier. And it is populated all the way through the data. Now the tool has been written to take into account that you may already have identifiers assigned. So let's say in this data that I'm working with here, I go in today and I add 4 new roads from a subdivision that's come in. I can still just run the tool again, and what it will do is it will find only those records that do not currently have a segment ID, and it will populate those. The rest of them, it will leave alone. Now, if you're already using some method of assigning unique identifiers to each record, you are welcome to continue using it. This tool is certainly not required, nor is the format for the unique identifier required. This is just a tool that we put together to help make your life easier if this is a task you had not already tackled or something you were not already worried about in your data. And that concludes this episode of the Kansas NG9-1-1 GIS training series. Our next episode will cover the topology from the Kansas NG9-1-1 GIS data model. Thank you for your time and attention.